I'm Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with Jason Pender and Carolyn Raab, who are both from Corsa. Jason is the VP of Sales, and Carolyn runs the marketing team. How are you both doing?
Pretty good.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us.
I'm looking forward to talking to you guys. You have some very interesting product and kind of security design work going on with your product. Very exciting. We spent some time upstairs going through it a little bit. Let me see if I can guide you through. Tell me if I'm asking the right questions and you guide me through. So the idea here is really around network security and kind of dynamic software-defined network security. And you guys have a product a lot of people might think of as doing load balancing, but it seems like it does so much more because you took this virtual kind of approach. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Did I get an A on that?
I think you got it right.
Let's go. We'll go back and we'll piece through that. I feel good that I passed the audition on describing it. Let's start with the idea of software defined. Let's start with that. Carolyn, tell us when you hear software defined in the context of networking or network security, what comes to mind?
So for us, software defined is all about virtualizing as much as possible. So Corsa is a hardware appliance company, but we offload everything possible into the virtual world. And that's sort of where the load balancing comes in. It's that offload function. And software defined means that you have basically an unlimited ability to offload into virtual instances of whatever you should like. For instance, any kind of service chain that might be hanging off our appliance.
So you're sitting in line,
You sit in line,
collecting traffic, making a decision, and then offloading to some
and
virtual.
basically load balancing into, for instance, some form of service chain that could start with something like SSL decrypt, because that's the function you need. But we don't, as an appliance, we're not concerned with what we are offloading into. It can be anything in the service chain. But it's virtual, can be physical to start, but really what we've come at this from, and so we try not to use the word load balancing, on its own is the software-defined aspect of the load balancing is the fact that you can leverage the cloud and the whole premise of the cloud to virtualize.
That's awesome. Now, Jason, there's a lot of kind of additional features that come with service chaining, a lot of different use cases that come with service chaining. And that's why I think we were talking about maybe next generation as a good moniker for what you're doing. Take me through some of the possibilities here that you can implement.
Yeah, that's a great question. When we started in the market and we were initially exploring being able to orchestrate into a service chain using software definition, we, as Carolyn mentioned, were approached by a number of partners that we're in business with today who were interested in scaling TLS and SSL decryption. As we know, the majority of network traffic these days is encrypted. And most companies who have firewalls are not able to inspect that at their borders within strategic parts of the network because firewalls today won't support that level of decryption. So initially we found an interesting area where we're able to scale and amplify decryption for companies who want to do 10 gig plus 10 gig, 40 gig, 100 gigs worth of TLS and SSL decryption. But in doing so, we have created a service chain that now allows you to decouple your entire security layer from the network, should you want to do that. So as opposed to putting a firewall sitting in the main path, you can now move those security services down into the service chain. They could be hardware appliances, but we see a vision in the future for them to be virtualized appliances.
There might be some people watching who aren't entirely familiar with service chain. Is the idea that you're connecting virtual functions together dynamically? Maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's correct. Service chaining is something that people shouldn't be concerned with. It's a fairly straightforward abstraction from the network. It simply is horizontally scaling across virtual instances of an application, and that could be in our case it's a security application.
The SSL TLS use case, I'm assuming that must be a pretty popular case for you.
It certainly is, yes. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, and as everybody knows, 70-80% of traffic nowadays is encrypted. firewalls weren't built to do decryption, so there are appliances and software solutions out there that are specifically dedicated to performing that decryption so that traffic can be inspected. So there is absolutely a growing demand for that, and of course we're seeing more malware and more intrusions and threats traversing encrypted communications. So it's no longer acceptable to say, well, if it's encrypted, then I'm protected, because we are now seeing threats that are traversing encrypted communications.
You do that work in partnership with other companies and so on in the context of, say, a legacy architecture or something?
Absolutely. So we're very proud to be. We just announced 2 major partnerships, one with Symantec and one with McAfee.
You got 2 good ones there.
Yes, we do. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Carolyn, you were down at Empower just a couple of weeks ago, so you could probably speak to McAfee a little.
They have, like lots of people, they have customers coming to them who want to scale their ability to inspect traffic. It's no longer okay to let traffic through without full inspection. And for them, those 10 gig, 40 gig, 100 gig links, it's uncomfortable, but I think it's well known that pretty well firewalls, in terms of the threat protection they offer, is maybe 20% of their throughput capacity. And then when you also ask them to do SSL decrypt, you lose another 50%. So you're looking at maybe being able to address or inspect 5 to 10% of traffic on those high capacity links. So the work with McAfee and others is all to address that.
So the capacity and scaling really is one of the differentiators for you
It's
guys.
a big thing for us, yeah. And the horizontal scaling that we bring absolutely lets a McAfee or a Symantec or anybody with the desire to offer up that inspection the ability to then hang off of us any number, and that's, again, where we don't limit the number of virtual instances that we can load balance into, and we also don't limit the number of physical appliances, because a lot of people, and I think Jason comes to it from that angle, when we're out talking to people about today, they have physical infrastructure that they want to scale up. Buying bigger boxes isn't solving it for them. And so we can load balance into an array of those physical boxes, or even a mix of physical and virtual. So they can slowly migrate to this pure virtual world that everybody is trying to get to. So that's another interesting attribute, is sometimes it's physical things we load balance into, sometimes it's virtual, but it's often starts at physical and has a sort of this hybrid approach.
As an old network engineer, it's refreshing for me to hear you use load balance as a verb in describing what you're doing. I mean, we all know that in a data center and an architecture, it's hard to think of anything that may be more central, more important than the load balancing front door to your infrastructure. Really does play an important role. And you guys do have customers that use your solution for that. Do you think that's a really good base on which to do network security? Seems like it is to me. I mean, you're certainly positioned in the right place, architecturally.
We believe architecturally.
Best place to be.
What it gets you is a solution today, instant inspection. And then as your security posture needs to change, as your policy changes, as your need for more security capacity changes, you elastically create or release more virtual security in that service chain. And so we move to this idea of truly dynamic security service chaining, where you spin up and down your security as you need it. And that's the cloud, right? That's what, when people talk about the cloud, that's what they want from the cloud. And that's what we see ourselves bringing to network security.
That got me excited when we first met. What I thought was so cool, and still do, is this idea that you've got this gateway, this load balancer, maybe even think of it as a firewall, sitting in a location where decisions can be made and some dynamic action taken. I think that's such a cool scheme. Am I reading that right, Jason? That making a decision and doing something, the something can be very dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite a simple concept if you really think about where your large firewalls are placed today in strategic parts of the network, we would sit in those are the spots within the network that the Corsa platform would sit. And then we abstract the security layer away from the network so that, as Carolyn mentions, you can elastically scale up and down without any redesign or any impact to the network at all. So think about moving the firewall off to the side and then dynamically scaling across hardware appliances that then become virtual appliances over time. So a customer coined it quite nicely for me a couple of weeks ago and said, well, what you're really doing is scaling what I have today, but you're providing a graceful path to migrating to what I need tomorrow. And that's really what we're talking about here today.
That's pretty cool. That's a good way of describing it. Hey, tell me a little bit about the company. So Corsa, you guys are north of the border, as we say here in New York. Tell us about the company.
So headquarters in Ottawa, Canada. A lot of our DNA comes from a telecom networking background, but of course with networking and security sort of interplaying so significantly, we've also been building up our security expertise. That's where Jason comes in. Jason is not based north of the border. Jason is based down here stateside, and we've been at software defined for about 5 years. Started in software defined networking, and now have taken all of that learning and are applying it to the network security space, I think quite successfully with this software-defined load balancing idea.
Jason, how'd you get involved with Corsa?
Yeah, that's a funny story. So, in fact, you and I have history that you probably know a little bit about. So I was at Fortinet years ago, and Palo Alto and Cisco and so on. So I've worked sort of the last 20 years in network security, primarily running teams that were selling into service provider and carrier. And in fact, one of my good colleagues, a friend of mine who lives locally, who used to work for me at Fortinet, was the introduction into Corsa. He was at Fortinet and held a product management position at Fortinet. So he was my introduction into the team up in Ottawa. So the team was moving from or evolving from software-defined networking to software-defined network security, if you like, with a focus on security now. So given my background with these other vendors, it was a really good fit for both parties.
That's fantastic. And your background with these networking companies is network security companies, right on the money for the direction. Of course. Let's get back. I have a couple more questions, kind of about customer and enterprise setups as you guys are off talking. I know, Jason, you're probably talking to clients every day about this sort of thing.
Sure.
Do you see, I think I know the answer, but I'll ask you, but part A, do you see everyone kind of moving to cloud? That's part A, it's probably yes. But B would be, how does that affect, as a team building something that traditionally would sit at sort of a gateway? As things distribute, is it software defined that's the solution to that? Because I'm thinking things are sort of scattering, right, architecturally. Am I reading that right? Is that what you hear from people? Hybrid cloud. That kind of thing.
Oh, and unequivocally, obviously, I think there's no question that 2018, perhaps 17 to a certain degree, really saw a big momentum in the movement of enterprise applications into the cloud, and whether that be private or public or hybrid.
A lot of public in there, right?
Yes.
Amazon, Microsoft, Google.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're for sure we're seeing that. We're seeing a relatively new segment in the network security space, which is software defined. Secure web gateway in the cloud, which is an interesting introduction. Since all these applications are in the cloud now, it makes sense to tunnel that traffic through a cloud instance.
Proxy, URL filtering, those types of functionalities.
Correct. Yeah, so Zscaler, IBOS, this type of company.
Old Blue Coat.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. So those are some of the sort of industry changes that we're seeing. So it does change it certainly changes the traditional approach to enterprise security architecture, since those applications are on the cloud now, and users are much more mobile. What that means is that the gateways in the network, the strategic parts of the network that where you're seeing traffic are changing from the traditional premise, and they are moving into the data center in the cloud. Some users, in fact, don't even go back into the enterprise now. Obviously, when they go out to the applications, they're going directly to those applications in the data center.
You know, Carolyn, sort of the same question, and I would add to it that with 5G infrastructure on its way, that really does make it very reasonable, certainly for a small company, to have no gateway, just everything wireless. Then suddenly, it's all virtual, right? 5G is a virtual network. Is that kind of, as you market the product, as you think about where you guys are going, I would imagine that wireless future, the virtual future, it must be both scary, but also maybe plays right into some decisions you made years ago.
Yeah, and I think 5G, IoT, you know, all those big drivers, smart cities. It's all talking to a world of massive amounts of traffic.
Yeah, sure.
And the traffic has to move, and endpoints need to be secured. And I think that our product is this software-defined approach recognizes or is playing into that growth in traffic, and still says, well, you have to protect the network. You're still at some point terrestrial, and you're still on a wire at some point, that you need to make sure that traffic is flowing in a secure way. And so whether we sit at an enterprise's traditional gateway, which is the entrance to something, or we sit on a wire at some point in the network to clean traffic that's destined for the enterprise, however it gets there ultimately, our software-defined approach can still be used very effectively. It might shift who is ultimately the customer for the product. In the beginning, we still think it's large enterprise very much. There's still a lot of private enterprise, a lot of hybrid. I mean, there's still a ways to go before it might become pure cloud.
That's awesome. Are Canadian buyers different than U.S. buyers? Is everybody kind of the same?
Okay, should I say this on camera? Who are the Canadian buyers?
It's just between us. Nobody's watching.
Yes, I think in Canada, the one thing that we have that's an obvious world industry is our financial institutions. We have, in the country itself, world-class banking, but those institutions are also very prominent on the world stage, and that would be an example of a market segment that is very important to us, and they would not be any different than anybody
I guess one
else.
thing I see from one country to the next is in some countries, particularly U.S., there may not be a lot of loyalty, so to speak, with one. You're happy to move from one thing to another, and virtual appliances will make that even easier, right? You switch on a dime. But in some places, there may be some connection, maybe locally. I've seen it certainly in Europe, that phenomenon frequently. Is there anything like that in Canada, or is it more just people buy the... I think it's the latter, that people buy the best capability.
People buy the best capability. Yeah, they will source.
Too bad you don't get those easy Canadian sales.
We don't get the easy,
right?
but
darn it, that seems unfair somehow.
I have to say we do have the best capability, so it's an obvious answer.
Just get some hockey tickets and you have no problem, right? This guy probably has great seats for hockey tickets. So.
But you know, to that question, there is one thing that actually does play out, and that is being the hardware appliance, the performant load balancer. We are manufactured in the U.S.
Oh,
and that actually is very important, because it is not trivial when people are talking about their network security. It is important for them where their products are designed and also manufactured. So it's not okay to say always designed in Canada, manufactured in someplace other than Canada or the U.S. So that is an important point.
Well, I love what you guys do. I've rooted for you from the beginning. I think you guys
Thank
have
you.
very, very, very cool technology.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A lot of the themes that you do, I think, are themes that I talk about every day. So go team. I hope you do real well.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ed.
Appreciate you coming by to visit.
Yeah, it's great to be
Come back
here.
and give me an update as you guys continue to build out your product.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you
Thanks
for having us.
visiting.
Thanks,
Yep.
Ed.
You bet. And we will see you next time.